Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. What a bunch of crap. I said crap from the pulpit, that's right. Don't you agree? Kids, when you're in school and somebody says something mean to you, does it hurt? Yeah, it does. Adults, when somebody says something mean to you, does it hurt? Absolutely, it sure does. That has to be the biggest lie of all time that we have ever told ourselves, or each other for that matter. If it was true, then we wouldn't have any need for the command that I'm sure that your mama and your dada told you, or that you tell your children to this day, or kids that your mother and father tell you, that if you ain't got nothing nice to say, then don't say nothing at all. That's right. I remember when my sisters and I were young, we were so mean to each other. It was awful. And still to this day, we kind of put those jabs in there when we can, you know. Your face is ugly. I mean, you're so pretty today, you know. I just spent a couple days with my sisters and it was fantastic. And it's one of those things that if you're not picking on each other, then you wouldn't know I loved you, kind of a thing, right? But I mean, when we were so mean to each other, when my mom finally had enough of it, she would make us say 10 nice things to each other. We'd have to sit and look at each other really close and tell each other 10 nice things. I like your shirt. Your eyelashes are really long. Your breath doesn't stink today. You know, and then by like 4 or 5, we were laughing so much that we had forgotten everything that we were mad about most of the time. We were laughing and we couldn't even tell you what we were being mean about or what we were upset for. But the truth is, if it ain't nice, it most likely will, in fact, be words that do hurt us, right? It will most definitely be something that we remember. They do, in fact, hurt. But sometimes, and for some people more than others, words can be very healing. They can be reassuring. They can let us know that we are loved and cared for. And as Will has kind of walked through these last couple of weeks, he's mentioned that there's some times that we can be given a gift, and I'm thinking, that's great, but can you just tell me that I look pretty today? Can you just tell me that, you know, you need some tacos? Let's go get some tacos. And I know that's kind of a gift, but that's also that reassurance that I care for you, and I want to tell you how much I care for you. Words can hurt, but they do also heal. And maybe it might be nice thing number 5 before you're laughing and enjoying that person again. But words can heal. Words give life. They can create. For it is by his words that he creates. And the Lord said, "Let there be light," and the light was formed. And the Lord said, "Let there be dry land separated from the waters," and there was earth and the seas. And the Lord said, "Let there be separation of day and night." And there was sun that was created to light the day, and the moon was created to light the nighttime. And the Lord said. But long before the word would ever come forward from the Lord's mouth, it was the word. John's gospel begins by introducing Christ, not by stating facts of his birth or the genealogy of his history, of his lineage, but by giving a beautiful theological account of his relationship with God. John 1:1-2 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God." Jesus is the Word, giving light and life to everyone and everything. The Greek here for word is logos. Say it with me, logos. Very good, you know Greek now, you know a word. Jesus is logos, the personal wisdom and power and union with God. His ministry in the creation and government of the universe. John practically parallels taking how the scriptures begin, the creation begins by saying "in the beginning," and parallels it in his gospel as well, focusing on this absolute position of before all of the things, there was the Word. There was Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And to me, it totally seems to make sense to begin in this way, and as well as the fact that the Lord used this imagery for us. But of course, it makes sense to me because I see it from this bird's eye view, right? We have a different perspective than they did in this time, but from my bird's eye view, that it would be that this word, the word that is with God, the word that is God, would become the word made flesh, as John describes in verse 14, that God would choose to dwell among us because it is through word that we would be brought into creation. And the Lord said, let us make man in our image. So why wouldn't it be by word, the word that was with God and that was God, that we would be made flesh, because he himself is the word that was dwelling among us, that he was made flesh. That God would now offer a possibility for new creation through that which is the word. The opportunity for new life, for life everlasting. We were created once by word, the Lord said, and then created anew by the word. Yes, words can hurt, but words can heal. Words can create. And because I've been talking about love languages during this sermon series, following some of Jesus' teaching that he really hits on in John's gospel, all of them at some point. He really focuses at some point on all 5 of these love languages in one way or another. And as he said, we're going to talk about words of affirmation today. I am definitely a words of affirmation kind of gal. It's kind of adjusted a little bit over time as I've gotten older, but I am a words of affirmation kind of gal. I feel all the warm love and warm and fuzzies when I get that "atta girl." I love it when I hear the "I'm so proud of you," or "you're the best cook." Thanks. Or "yes, you do need those pair of shoes. You get those, girl. You do need that dessert. You deserve it." Being a words of affirmation kind of a person means that that phrase I mentioned earlier really is a sack of lies. Words can be so damaging for somebody who is a words of affirmation kind of person. It's something that we need to feel the love, and when we feel we receive the opposite, it can be totally detrimental to ourselves. If the words coming my way are like sticks and stones, then you bet they're gonna hurt me. Of course, there's a fine line here, though, between seeking the kudos, the cheers, the affirming words from others, those "atta girl" praises, and being okay when we don't get those things, that we don't get those words of affirmation for everything that we do. This can be especially hard for somebody whose job is in the spotlight, who wants to constantly have that word given to them that you're doing a good job, or somebody like a pastor who's standing in front of you preaching, and you expect at some point that somebody is going to say something to you, sometimes bad, sometimes good, but the point is that we have to be at a place of humility, of not saying things because we are going to get that "atta girl." I have to have a humility check nearly daily. So there's a balance here that we have to question ourselves as to why we are doing these things. What are we pursuing in this moment? To get those warm and fuzzies for these things that we are doing, to get the "atta girl," and how God's truth fits in the midst of our need for those warm and fuzzies, those needs for the words that affirm. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. Pastor Will preached last week on physical touch. To be touched by Jesus is to have this overwhelming sense of being known, being connected in a completely different way. We looked to the passages of this healing of a man who had been blind since birth, and he had this super gross method of spitting in the dirt and making this mud paste and putting it on his eyes and having it washed off, and it was kind of gross. Yes, it is one of the grosser of stories that are in the scriptures, but he was healed. The boys, when they were little, would play baptism. When we go to the pool or the lake, they would baptize each other in the name of the Father and the Son and the Ghost, it was really super cute. This is one of those narratives I'm really glad my kids never played. Because with 3 boys, I could see them spitting in the dirt and like, "here you go, and you're healed, ha ha, let me rub it in a little bit more." Thankfully, they do not do this reenactment here. Will had mentioned the question of how many healings were completed through Jesus physically touching the individual. This reveals the radical depth of his love for the individual despite their condition or their social status. This blind man considered himself a sinner to the extent that God wouldn't even entertain the idea of listening to his prayers, let alone that the Son of God would heal him. Likewise, Jesus is also healing not just through touch, but through simply speaking it into fruition, speaking the healing into existence, sometimes miles apart. He said to the paralyzed man, get up and take up your mat and walk. And he did so. He got up and he walked home. He uses words to rebuke the waves as the storm is raging and the winds are coming over and then the waters are still. They brought him a man, many that were demon possessed, it says in the word, and they were sick people. And Matthew 8:16 says that he cast out the spirits with a word. Moments before that narrative in Matthew 8:16 in Matthew's gospel, it says that there was a centurion that comes to Jesus, begging him, pleading him, not just saying, hey, this is guy that I think that can heal him. No, he's pleading with Jesus to heal his servant who was paralyzed. A servant that clearly could have no value to the centurion. He could have went and got another one, but he was of value to this man. Now, a centurion wasn't just a Roman soldier. A centurion was a commander, an officer of the Roman army. They received their name because they were in charge of 100 soldiers in their troop. And it would be by a centurion that later on we would read that he would be in charge of the death of Jesus. But in this moment, we have a completely different interaction. Jesus proclaims that he would, in fact, go and heal this man, go to his home and heal this servant. But the centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. Do what? What does he say? Do what? We want to go here, and he says, just say the word, and my servant will be healed. Just say it. Say the word, and it'll be done. And the faith of the centurion is so astounding, even to Jesus, that the centurion, this Gentile, fully understanding Jesus' healing power, was not some magic trip that the magician had to be there to do his thing. Abracadabra, I think you said last week. But in fact, he knew that even from afar, just a word would heal. Saying the word, it was the word that would heal even at a distance. And so I echo the words of Will from last week yet again, that we see that Jesus is consistently offering a different mode of which he heals, which tells us that it is not the method but the Messiah that we are to focus on. But man, I can't help that I can focus on this, that even with a word, demons flee. With a word miles apart, a paralyzed man is given new legs. Even in our physical ailments, we are no match for his authority. That even him speaking, get up and go, our legs just obey. Jesus touches and heals and performs miracles, shows the depth of his radical love. And to me, Jesus' words to heal and perform miracles shows the depth of his power and authority on earth as it is in heaven. It just has my mind absolutely blown sometimes that we hear even a name, a command, that even the dead are raised. Lazarus, dura exo, Lazarus, come forth. Even death obeys his words. We have to pause here, though. We have to pause here because we can get caught up in the healings and the miracles, can't we? And the awesome, the warm and fuzzies. That Jesus is doing these great things and the people are seeing it and they're believing because they want to believe it. They want to. So as they're seeing it, they are believing it. And so for us today, though, we have to pause in these healings and miracles that Jesus performed, because we can forget that he is so much more than just a physician, so much more than a healer, so much more than an exorcist. Jesus Christ as the Word is more than the feel-goods, and his words are more than the warm and fuzzies. Because words can hurt. Jesus' words can hurt. And not because he's being harmful, but because simply we don't always want to hear them. The truth hurts sometimes, doesn't it? We learned that in week 1 about quality time. The truth shall set you free. And I love that we sang that song this morning. I didn't even catch it that we sang that week as well. But as Jesus' words will set you free, we have to take a step back, and simply having the knowledge of that truth isn't enough. We have to act upon it. Likewise, hearing the words of Jesus and not listening to the words of Jesus are two different things, right? We can hear our mom's suggestion, but not listen to it. We can hear someone's words and not listen to them. We can hear our mom or our dad's advice to not do that dumb thing, and do not listen to our mom and dad's advice to not do that dumb thing. And guess what? We do that dumb thing, don't we? Because we didn't listen. We heard it, but we didn't necessarily listen. And we can do that with Jesus too, can't we? We can love learning and hearing and reading about all the glorious things that he did, and be so stuck on the fact of the feel-goods that we have in our salvation and the eternal life that he offers that comes with our Lord in heaven, because he died on that cross and he gave a gift of eternal life and resurrection and life everlasting. And then we can walk out those doors and we gossip. And then we can walk out those doors and we live for money. Walk out those doors and be rude to the person that we encounter at the stoplight, the waitress or the waiter, our husband or our wives, our children. We can walk out that door and pick up that bottle, carry lust in our eyes and hate in our hearts. Oh yes, we can hear the words of Jesus and not listen to them. And the most hurtful words of Jesus are the ones that we don't listen to. John 10, starting in verse 1, is right after the narrative that Will spoke about last week, healing the blind man. And at the end of chapter 9, he tells the Pharisees that if you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty, but you remain guilty because you claim you can see. And so as we move into John 10, and now Jesus putting on this point of hearing versus listening to them with an illustration. Let's take a look starting in verse 1. Truly, truly. If he says it twice, you pay attention. I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. To him the door opens, then the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he puts forth all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. A stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. It is the sheep who know their shepherd's voice, and not only know it, but they hear it, and not only hear it, but they listen to it. They follow it. And those sheep, it is those sheep that are closest to their shepherd. And we are close to our shepherd. We are provided for by the shepherd. And we are led by the shepherd. And we are protected by the shepherd. And we are loved by the shepherd. And we are sought out by the shepherd when we step away. And as we are in the position of receiving this provision, leading, guidance, protection, love, salvation, teaching, grace, mercy, forgiveness, over and over and over again from the shepherd, we begin to want to be transformed by the shepherd. And not just to the point that we are changed and we feel better about ourselves, but so that we are so transformed that we want others to feel it and experience it too. So transformed internally by these things because we listen to the voice of the shepherd that we want to in turn lead like the shepherd. We want to speak like the shepherd. We want to learn and grow like the shepherd and continue to learn and grow from the shepherd. And we want to bring other sheep to the shepherd and have them meet him too. And it starts with our hearing and listening and remaining close to the voice that is present as he leads. And then in turn, we pour that out to others and bring them along the way. We share the word because we know the voice of the word. We are so transformed by his word that we pour out his word. See, words of affirmation is the only love language that requires verbal expression. Think back to a time when you were told that you had done something good, that you did a good job on something, that you were thanked for your effort. Perhaps it was a boss or a friend or a parent that recognized your hard work and verbalized their approval to you. Or hearing the words, I love you, audibly to your child or spouse or received it from your parent or your children. Those simple words of appreciation may have lifted you up for days even, or made you just feel a little bit more connected to that person who spoke them. When it comes to married couples, Dr. Chapman, who wrote the book on love languages, tells us that words of affirmation is actually the most common love language. And yet I think it's probably one of the most underacted thing that we do for one another in a lot of ways. We underestimate the power and the value of a simple I love you. I'm thankful for you. You look great in those jeans. We want to hear that. Just saying. He says words of affirmation are simply true statements affirming the worth of another person straight from their heart. Affirming the worth of another person to them personally, right? Now notice it is words of affirmation, not words of identification. We are not telling someone who they are or offering them their identity based on their outer appearance, their efforts, or their successes. We are merely giving praise to affirm their worth in our lives, for us personally, and in the lives of others. This is why we get caught in the affirmation trap. If we are a words of affirmation person in a lot of ways, we get caught in this moment of wanting to hear it, because instead of feeling loved because of the worth that we are affirmed in by the words of others, we can get caught up in our identity being intertwined with the affirming words of others. Does that make sense? Because we end up basing who we are on the affirming words that we receive from them. And so when we don't receive them, we question our worth. We question our identity and whether we are of value to that person. So when we don't receive them, we don't get our love tank filled, as Dr. Chapman puts it. We don't have that poured into us. And so now our personal identity is in question. For example, I mentioned I need to be cautious of words of affirmation as my love language as a pastor. If my vision of my worth to others, to all of you, my identity is so wrapped up in who I am as a pastor, and as I get done and I'm not affirmed by the words and those attagirls of others, then I begin to internally question my value as a pastor. And I can even get to the point where I pour more energy, more time, more research, more everything, so that my next time I preach, I can get that attagirl. So that my identity is validated as a pastor. Now fill in the blank for you. For you, it might be your job. It might be your role as a parent. Do you need to have your identity validated as an employee? Do you work harder to get that attaboy whenever you are working, or maybe you're working on a project and you just need to feel that sense of accomplishment? Maybe you're like that with your children. And you recede in that way because you're trying to get done, so you get those praises, and so you start arguing with your spouse. You're exhausted. You remove yourself from your kids and your home, and you're mentally and physically drained. And when you get that promotion and that word of recognition and that attaboy and that attagirl, there's this high moment for a second, and then you get right back to that place of needing it again. Pursuing that next task so that you can get your validation of who you are. For you, it may be as a parent. For you, it may be your job, that your kids no longer need you any longer, and your identity was so wrapped up in that point of being a parent, lingering in the affirmation of their reliance upon you. Words of affirmation are affirming words of a worth to that person, not words of identity or affirming value of your identity. Your identity is in your job. Our identity isn't in our role as parents. It's not in the sports that we play or the things that we go to and watch and participate in. It's not in the titles we carry. Our identity is in the one whose voice we listen to, the one we follow, the one we invite others to follow along with. Are you listening? Or are you just hearing? I want to close with the narrative of the scriptures that I'm sure you've heard before, but I think it really illustrates this so well. So hang with me. Matthew 16, starting in verse 13. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he was asking his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, but still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah," which means son of Jonah, "because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. I also say to you that you are now Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it." So Jesus here intentionally points out the difference in what people say and what you say, segregating the two, making a difference between the two. Just like we must remember the difference in what people say about us and what Jesus says about us and our identity. Amen? But the words of affirmation here weren't just words towards Jesus and affirming Jesus' identity in these moments from the disciples and Simon Peter, but in this intimate moment with Simon Peter. Who do you say I am? You are the Christ. You are the Son of God. All these others say this, but I know this is who you are. God has revealed this to you, he says, not man. And because of that, you are no longer Simon, but you are Petros, or Peter, which means stone, which means rock. And upon this rock, I will build my church. The gates of hell, death, will not overcome it. Can you just imagine this moment for him? How proud Simon Peter felt in this moment. I bet he adjusted his shirt a little bit and gave a little, okay, yes, that's what's up. It's probably one of the most powerful words that anybody has ever received, an affirmation of all time. My church will be built upon you. The grave will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom, he says. You see me for who I am. You've heard from the Father. Nothing can hinder what is going to happen. Such a great moment. Peter was listening to the voice of Jesus. Or was he? Verse 21, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and be raised again upon the third day. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God, forbid it. This shall never happen to you. But Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block for me, for you are setting your mind on not on God's interests, but on man's. It's not hard to see Peter's following of these steps, right? Peter confesses Jesus as Messiah. Jesus compliments Peter and tells him that the house of the church is going to be built upon him, offering words of affirmation. Then Jesus tells of his death and suffering and resurrection, and Peter tells of his rebuke to Jesus, and Jesus is like, no, behind me, Satan, but calls him Satan just 2 seconds before that, calls him the rock that the church will be built upon. Ouch. Behind me. This was a strong rebuke from Jesus, yet entirely appropriate. Though a moment before Peter spoke as a messenger of God, then this moment here he speaks as a messenger of Satan. I'm sure Peter had no idea that he was speaking as a messenger of Satan, though, just like the moment before he had no idea he was speaking as a messenger for God. But in the midst of this amazing moment, Simon, now declared as Peter, the rock on which the church would be built, and even Hades would not overpower. And then nearly in the same breath, Peter allows the enemy to use him as a tool against the ministry of the cross. We can't blame him though, right? Because we also have this bird's eye view. He is so deep in the gospel story that we know what's more to come, but he doesn't. Peter declares the identity of Jesus Christ as the Son of God, as the Christ. And as Jesus' words of affirmation are received by Peter, we can see him slip into hearing Jesus instead of listening to him. Hearing the shepherd, but not following his leadership. The most hurtful words of Jesus are the ones that we don't listen to. So we listen, we hear, we follow, we receive words of affirmation as acknowledgement of our worth in another person's life. Absolutely. And trust me, if you love words of affirmation and you love a words of affirmation person, we want to know our worth in your life. Tell us, affirm it. But those words are not affirming our identity or adding value to our identity, but merely a method of filling our love tank. Just letting us know that you care and you give praise to the Father for who we are in him. Anything else is a temptation to be a hindrance to Jesus Christ, the Word, the Logos, the one that has the power to put sense into the world, making the world orderly instead of chaos, putting sense into our worlds, our lives, if we just slow down and listen a little. You know, I really didn't like writing this sermon, which is funny because you'd think I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to tell him all about how I love to be loved, right? But I struggle with this, and even on this morning, on the way here, I sent like my daily Snapchat streaks, and I told the Lord, I was like, I don't like it. We're going to do this. I'm going to need you to show up, God. And even as I sent my little picture on Snapchat to some friends, I said, I'm ready for worship, but I'm not ready for this sermon because it figures that my sermon on words of affirmation would have me feeling absolutely no sense of affirmation of my words. That was what I said. And in an instant after I reread that and hit that send button, in that moment I realized that I had been leaning on my words. It was my words of affirmation. Peter didn't realize that he was leaning on his own authority in that moment. Rather, that he was leaning on the authority of the one that had just proclaimed as being the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. We can be within the will of God, pursuing his purposes and listening to his voice, and in a drop of a dime be at a place of ourselves and our own identity and our own self-worth, and be at the place of our own control and our own will. Get behind me, Satan. It is not your place to be in front of me, Peter. Your place is behind me. I asked you to follow me, not lead me. Be the rock that I asked you to build my church upon, not the pebble in my shoe. Stumbling and hindering the will of God is an inconvenience. So if you love a words of affirmation person, affirm them. Tell them that you love them. Tell them that you appreciate them. Give the most of random of compliments, and I promise you there is not one that is too small or too big. And no matter if you are or you aren't a words of affirmation person, you still have the still small voice that is the Lord that is pursuing you. Listen. Don't just hear. Listen to the word, his words. For the voice of the shepherd is calling out to you. You. For sticks and stones may break my bones, but the word of God I am forever searching.